Chapter 10, You Don't Exist. My high-powered pace of work and study soon caught up with me, and I ended up sitting in a doctor's office, exhausted. The doctor quizzed me about my lifestyle, and the source of my fatigue soon became evident. I had been considering a missionary position in the hot West Indies, but he ruled it out for me. The heat would destroy me in my weakened condition, he insisted. I'd been offered the pastorate of a small church, but I felt uncomfortable with the idea of pastoring, especially as a single person, and I had no desire to marry. I'd seen quite enough of the pitfalls marriage could hold. But then there was the option of going to a Bible college for a year to relax and study. That's it, the doctor said, snapping his fingers. It will be perfect for you. Take my advice. I'm an old man and you're a young man. Slow down. I left his office wondering what a doctor could know about spiritual things. I would get my direction from God. I told myself, not some doctor. For the next few days, I petitioned God desperately. What did he want of me? On Sunday afternoon, as I was praying, sitting on the edge of my bed, I heard a voice. You're going to the Bible school, the voice said, and I heard a book close with a loud slap. Instantly, I fell asleep. In an hour, I awoke, and the anxiety of the decision had fled. I was at complete peace, and I began planning for Bible school. The year at Eastern Pentecostal Bible College in Peterborough, Ontario, was a recuperative, refreshing one. My studies drew me deeper yet into the Word. At the same time, my dorm mates and I found our way into constant college mischief, springing friendly, practical jokes on faculty and students alike, with tantalizing unpredictability. My closest friends, Dave DeStallo, Ed Morrison, and Doug Hagee, determined to marry me off and secretly organized a Maury Blair Day on which they peppered the entire campus with billboards declaring my availability for courtship. Between water fights and clothing theft and assorted other campus clownings, the long-hidden Maury Blair emerged. With the shell of loneliness and insecurity finally broken, I found a comfortable, fun-living Maury inside. All of which would be required for my first task after college as a counselor at Teen Haven Residential Ministry for young people in Montreal, Quebec, under the leadership of Pastor Robert Johnson. Here, teenagers who had squandered themselves on drugs or alcohol were housed and cared for and led into the love of the Lord. It was often tense, erratic, disturbing work, and without the flexibility I had acquired at school, I might never have survived. As it turned out, it was at Teen Haven that God began revealing to me how my childhood, horrible as it was, could be used by Him as a vessel of ministry to others. I noticed a young boy lying around the Teen Haven Center one day and looking despondent and directionless. "What's the matter, Jake?" I asked, sitting down next to him. He sighed heavily. You wouldn't know anything about hiding and being on the run," he replied. I felt a flood of empathy for him, and as I heard his words, in the next few minutes I told him some of my story. He looked at me in amazement, seeing not the rat-like child I described, but a reconstituted child of God. It was the beginning of a new life for Jake and for me. Since that encounter, I have had countless opportunities to share parts of my past with young people in trouble. Young people who feel as I did, that God could certainly never want them, since no people had ever wanted them. Again and again, I've seen the beautiful wellspring of revelation in the faces of troubled teenagers as they begin to sense the endless love of a Heavenly Father, a Father who has been there all along, just asking for their love. It was during my work at Teen Haven that I met Bev. For the first time in my life, I considered leaving bachelorhood. I was already past 30, well on my way to fulfilling my dream of emulating the Apostle Paul's singlehood, when Bev's big brown eyes and exuberant personality broke my stride. She was the product of a Christian home, a godly young lady, and great fun. I loved to be with her. When I was with her, I was caught up. When I was away from her, my mind floated back to her over and over. But there was something about me, something she should know. I could not know how she would react, but I knew I could never afford to let her find out some other way. "I need to tell you something," I offered tentatively on a foggy Saturday evening as we walked together. I meandered through my reasons for being at Teen Haven, my hopes for ministering to young people, and finally I came down to my own youth. "I had some problems as a young person," I said in a hopeful, casual tone. I was a bastard child. Bev looked at me with a question in her eyes. Her own heritage, which was very proper and somewhat sheltered, had not included such a concept, and it was a foreign term to her. "What do you mean?" she asked. I explained as delicately as I could, all the while watching her face to see if the new insight would drive her off. "I'm so sorry for you," she replied evenly. unsure about the proper response. But inside her heart was swelling with compassion. God had already begun to deal with her. It would be wonderful, she prayed silently, if I could make a home for him, if I could show him another side of life. Before it could happen, though, Bev would have to be exposed to more of the old side of life. Mom was happy for me when I told her I was going to be married. Several of my brothers and sisters met in Cambridge, Ontario, for a makeshift reunion, and in that setting, Bev and my mother were introduced. It was a polite encounter, with only the ill unease that people customarily feel when they meet relatives-to-be. It was the birth certificate problem that opened up old wounds. Bev offered to apply for a marriage license. All I had to do was give her my birth certificate. I don't have one, I had to answer. I had learned it years before, but I had studiously avoided discussing the subject with anyone. Everybody has a birth certificate, Bev replied. Just write away for it. But my mother had failed to register me, and there was no document to write for. I would have to confront my mother. I know it wasn't registered, I began quietly, and I could see her face droop with sadness. But I need a birth certificate to get married, Mom. What do I have to do to get one? She took a long breath and let it escape slowly. Her past, so often swept under the emotional carpet, had billowed up like a dust cloud once again. We could go to the Registrar General's office and check on it, she said, looking at the floor. Perhaps she foresaw the ordeal it would be. The registrar was a gruff older man. As we sat down across the desk from him, he dispensed with the simple question quickly. Name, age, address, and bore into the tough material. Why wasn't he registered when he was born, he demanded of her. Well, he was born in the house, Mom answered haltingly, and born out of wedlock. That's no reason for not registering, the man growled. Then he turns to me. Have you ever signed any legal documents? Well, I guess I have. Why? It's illegal, he snapped, because you're not registered. My mind flew through the list of documents I'd signed. Mortgage papers, auto financing, and a dozen others. You don't even belong here, the man continued. You're presently the citizen of no country. You don't belong here. You don't belong anywhere. Mom was crushed. The registrar was feeling on her obvious sense of guilt and making her suffer all over again for sins long past. For all intents and purposes, he went on, you don't exist. How do I know this woman is your mother? How can she prove you're her son? My mother sat humiliated, and I was angry. Listen, Mac, I shot back at the man. This happens to be my mother. And if anybody should be mad at her, it should be me, not you. So please treat her with respect. The man backed down, surprised by the reprimand. We proceeded to work out a system for getting him some shred of documentation as to my existence. Mom suggested that my stay at a London hospital as an infant, which I had never known about, when those records arrived at the registrar's office, the birth certificate was generated and sent to me. Finally, I existed, and yet more of my past would be dredged up. Bev and I worked together as husband and wife with increasing enthusiasm, first at Teen Haven, later in a church in Hanover, Ontario, and at Teen Challenge Centre for Youth Rehabilitation in Toronto. Bev was my second revolution, the perfect partner to help me grow spiritually and emotionally after the amazing first revolution of salvation and redemption. Her loving touch transformed me once again, giving me that full swell of God's best as she worked alongside me day by day. In Toronto, Lisa was born, and I wept as I looked at my tiny newborn baby. It was the first time Bev had ever seen me cry, but the flood of emotions was too much to hold back. This infant was mine, ours, and God's. Looking at the tiny kicking legs and flailing arms, the little round face so full of hope, I realized in a new way how gracious God is. I had been born in squalor of hushed scandal. God had allowed me to give my own child a transformed heritage. A few years later, after our ministry had carried us to Vancouver, British Columbia, Lori would follow Lisa into the new, brighter world God had given us. In Vancouver Teen Challenge Centre, and eventually as the director of Toronto Teen Challenge Ministry, I found that God was taking me through crisis in the lives of others that brought my own dreary childhood into a new perspective. As I ministered my staff members at rock festivals, alleyways, on street corners, and in crash pads, I found young people all over the nation of Canada whose lives were tail-spinning. And the tragedies were all more important because in so many cases these teenagers had abused themselves. They had not needed a Cyrus Wick. Many had enjoyed the parentage of Christian people, yet they had literally taken themselves apart, piece by piece, some by drug abuse, some by alcoholism, others a variety of excesses. Again and again, the gruesome experiences of my past bore fruit in the retelling. A young man named Phil came to Toronto Teen Challenge one day and told me his two brothers were just about to crash and burn if they didn't get help soon. They were holed up with some of their friends, feeding on acid and speed in a crash pad near our center, and he wanted me to pay them a visit with him right away. I agreed. "Just let me warn you before we go," Phil added. "Sometimes their friends get high on LSD. I seen them running through the house with machetes, doing all kinds of crazy things." The big red light went on inside of me. "Now just a minute," I said to Phil. "Let's talk about this whole thing." "Don't worry about it," he assured me. "If I go in there, I can handle them. I have a pretty good influence on them. They'll listen to me. I can get you in there to talk to these guys, and they won't do anything to you, I promise." With plenty of reservations about it, I agreed to go. "You can't go like that," Phil said, as if he were startled that I would even consider it. "What do you mean?" I asked. "They'll think you're a cop if you go in like that," he responded directly. I was wearing a sports jacket and slacks. "You'll have to change." I changed into blue jeans, scooped some gospel literature into my briefcase, and we took off. On the way to the pad, Phil unloaded his story. He was a backslidden Christian. He had come to Teen Challenge for help because he knew the Lord was the only hope his kid brothers had. When I told him my own story briefly, he reacted with enthusiasm. "That's what these guys need to hear," he said emphatically. "You've got to tell them that." We pulled the car up in front of a grubby old house. A couple of doors down, I noticed was a house with several motorcycles parked on the front lawn. "I'd take you in there too," Phil said. "There's a guy in there dying of drug abuse, but they kill you as you walk to the front door, so I can't take you in there." I breathed a silent sigh of relief. One crash pad in the day was more than enough for me. "Just a minute," I said, stopping Phil at the door. "Before we go in, we're going to pray." "Pray?" "Pray." "Are you scared?" "Yes." "Oh." "We're going to pray and ask God to help us say the right things when we get in there." I bowed my head and prayed quickly, both for Phil to renew his commitment to the Lord and for his burned-out brothers inside. As he opened the door, the sweltering summer heat and the stench of pot and urine blasted us. We made our way through the house, stepping over intertwined bodies and around wobbling tokers, until we came to the long, narrow kitchen. I instinctively glanced around the room for possible escape routes. I had already come through too much house to get back out that way. The back door was the opposite end of the kitchen, past the two guys sitting on the chairs along the wall, past the big guy with a red beard standing solemnly in front of the door, past the four others sitting around the kitchen table rolling joints. There was only one window. It was high on the wall, almost to the ceiling, and too small for an adult to climb through under the best of circumstances. Which these were not. I was trapped. I would get out of this place with approval of my hosts, or I would not get out at all. Phil and I stood next to the grimy refrigerator, and Phil addressed the ragtag group. "All right, you guys, listen. This guy's name is Maury Blair. He's a friend of mine, and I want you to shut up and listen to what he's got to say, because I think you need to hear it." Then Phil turned and walked out of the room. I never saw him or heard from him again, ever. I was too startled at his abrupt exit to stop him. Instead, as I realized that the entire kitchen full of people was staring at me, I spoke up, trying to sound unworried. "Hi guys," I began. "I'm Maury Blair, and I'm a staff worker from Toronto Teen Challenge on Broadview Avenue." It was the worst thing I could have said. The big guy with the red beard standing at the doorway spoke. "Teen Challenge," he drawled. "You guys kicked me out of there a couple of months ago." My heart began pounding even faster. "I don't know anything about that," I assured him, "but I'm here to tell you that there's a better trip for you than the one you're on." "If these guys go banana, I'm dead," I said to myself. Suddenly, going out in the blaze of glory like the Apostle Paul didn't hold the old glamour for me. "I didn't know why you got kicked out of Teen Challenge," I pressed on, "but I do know that God loves you guys and wants to change your lives. He did it for me, and he wants to do it for you." "What's God going to do for me?" "Man," the red guy sneered, "I got a disease in my liver from sticking dirty needles in my arms. I've got 9 months to live. What's God going to do for me?" "Maybe God would just touch your life and heal you," I suggested boldly. "What about my kid brother here?" he asked, pointing to his right. "He's got the same problem." "What about him?" Suddenly I realized that these were the two brothers Phil had brought me to see. The whole picture fell together in that moment. God could do the same for him, I responded. I began to share my story with the group, telling them how God had rescued me from the seemingly impossible. When I had finished, I said, "Look, you guys, here's the truth. I didn't have to come here tonight. I'm at your mercy. I came because I knew God wanted me to. Phil told me what was going on here, but I'm not the heat. I'm here to take all the risks to tell you God can change your life." "Hey, you know something? He's right," one of the group said. "He didn't have to come." With the ice broken, the various people began talking, asking questions about my past, about my faith, and allowing me to share Jesus with them. In moments, I felt like the best friend these guys had ever had. They eagerly took every piece of literature I brought with me. They slapped me on the back, shook my hand, smiled, a minister who cared about them. It was novel for them. 2 hours after I arrived, I left the place swimming in my own sweat, exhausted from the tension of the experience. Only God could have given me the words in answer to my frightened prayer that opened the door and allowed me to minister freely. The tragic experiences, relived in this grotesque setting, had borne fruit once again. 3 weeks later, I returned to the center from a speaking engagement to find a message. 2 young men had visited the center and asked to see me. The message they left: tell Maury Blair that we dropped by to say thanks for having the guts to come up to us and tell us what God did for him. We're brothers, and we're going home to Hamilton with our parents, and we're going to stay there where we belong. Just tell him thanks. As my ministry unfolded, my history likewise unfolded.